Welcome back to Mean Streets here on Game Plus Network. Chris Meaney here with you, and super thrilled to bring in my next guest, Pete Jenson of the NHL Network. You can give him a follow at NHL Jensen. Make sure you are following along at NHL Fantasy. He is the co-host of the NHL Fantasy on Ice podcast. And I'm just super excited to talk to Pete for one and talk hockey. You guys all know I love hockey. It feels like just a couple days away now, a few days away from actual preseason game. I know the rookies are playing each other, but preseason action. And Pete, before you know it, the NHL will indeed be here. You guys have a ton of content already over at NHL.com. I was going through it yesterday. You guys have covered absolutely every single base, projections, rankings, sleepers, guys on new teams. You just had team win projection totals, which is something that we'll talk about here throughout the show as well. Thanks for taking the time, man.
Oh, absolutely. Always great to talk pucks with you, especially this close to the season, right? This is when all our hockey content really starts to spike. It's heavily consumed. We love your show. We love when you come on our show. We're trying to cover it all together and project as best we can, right? There are always going to be some variables that we don't know until the puck drops or shortly after, but we do it the best we can here, and it works out well every year. So yeah, and also our forward point projections are going to be on the site momentarily. So definitely check out those as well as whether you're in a points only league or in a categories league. It's a fun time to be a hockey fan for sure.
Yeah, people play in all kinds of crazy leagues. So it's nice that you're trying to cover every single setting out there. We'll talk a lot about high stakes hockey, NFFC here, the bangers leagues, like Eric Young likes to say, a new addition over at
Yep.
FTN, and he'll join us when we preview another division. You and I are going to run through the Atlantic Division. You just finished up a podcast this morning. I don't know if you were able to get in the Kevin Hayes news just before we came live here. 6 to 8 weeks of abdominal surgery. So it looks like he's going to be out, Pete, for the first, I don't know, maybe month and a half of the season. I don't know if you have any initial thoughts on that right away. But Hayes is, a solid two-way player for the Flyers.
He is, and even though he's not in our top 250 rankings prior to that news, he's a really valuable player. And of course, when he first came to Philly, he made a big impact. And he's just like a surefire secondary scorer that when he's there, it's like kind of like Couturier. It's like those are the two most important players on the Flyers. So take one away, I think any progress they made this offseason in terms of steering the ship and making off-season slight upgrades, I would say, that gets lost a little bit here. So not having your number two center. So I was a little worried about the Flyers to begin with, and
Mm-hmm.
certainly some of the players on defense with how poorly things went last year. Ryan Ellis one step forward, two steps back, you could say, maybe with Ristolainen and Keith Yandel from a defensive standpoint. Those guys can
Yeah.
can score with the best of them, especially when they're on the power play. But yeah, just a little worried about the Flyers because we're talking about somebody coming out in favor of maybe the New York Rangers. Who's it going to be? Is it going to be Pittsburgh? Pittsburgh's a darn good team every single year, no matter what adversity they face. So I think the Flyers are even a step behind a team like Pittsburgh.
Yeah, I would agree. I like the Ryan Ellis edition, but there's some other questionable ones there as well.
Right.
Maybe Cam Atkinson can give them some firepower, but they're going to have to keep pucks out of their net. That's the
Yeah.
biggest thing when it comes to the Philadelphia Flyers. Let's talk about the Atlantic Division. One team has no issue keeping pucks out of their net, the two-time defending Stanley Cup champions. That's where we're going to start here. The Tampa Bay Lightning, not favored to win the division. Make sure you check out ftnbets.com for our prop shop where you can get the best possible odds. These odds are all from DraftKings. They're plus 210 to win the Atlantic. Most spots have them as plus 150. We'll get to the Leafs, but they are favored over at DraftKings. So we have the Bolts here, 7-1 to win the Stanley Cup again, three-peat. Their over/under for point total is 106.5. You have them for 55 wins over at NHL.com. A goalie tandem wins, I believe. Correct me if I'm wrong there in a second. I just put basically their top few players. Now, as you see on the board, there's no Alex Killorn, no Anthony Cirelli. Those guys are certainly interesting to me, but Nikita Kucherov, the brackets is where they're going, where Yahoo has them ranked. And if you're doing drafts on ESPN, it could certainly be different. High stakes leagues will have an episode for you people that are playing in high stakes leagues. Things are very different. The scoring, kind of caters to heavy goal scorers, heavy volume shooters, and guys who throw their body around. Like Brady Tkachuk is a as a lock and loaded first round pick in those leagues. Nikita Kucherov going as the fourth pick in Yahoo. Braden Point, 18. Andre Vasilevskiy, 21. Victor Hedman, 28. Steven Stamkos, 30. So you got 5 guys here inside the top 30. Andre Palat, 67. And then I put Anthony Cirelli in my own notes as a guy that I do like at 251. He's got center and right eligibility. Alex Barré-Boulet is my sleeper here, Pete, at 864. So not really thought about in Yahoo drafts, and we're still early there. He only played 15 games last season, scored 3 goals, 15 minutes per game. He may have a role on this team. As you know, that entire third line, one of the better third lines in the NHL, and a big reason that the Bolts have won 2 Stanley Cups in each of the past 2 seasons, gone. Yanni Gourde, Barclay Goodrow, Blake Coleman, gone, and David Savard also gone. Corey Perry, if you can't beat him, join him, I suppose. He's lost to the Bolts in each of the last 2 seasons in the finals, and now he's a member of Tampa Bay. He's not ring chasing. He already has one, but good for Corey Perry. What do you make? I mean, what can we really say about this team, Pete? I guess I'll go with Vasilevskiy. Are you willing to spend a first-round pick on him? He was a top 5 player in fantasy hockey last season, just with your standard goalie categories. Are you willing to spend a first-round pick on him? How are you attacking the goalie position in most of your drafts?
Well, I think that there's a lot of separation between him and the next best goalie, whether you think it's Hellebuck, whether you think it's Kemper now with the Avalanche, or whether you think it's Robin Lehner as the sure starter now that Fleury's gone in Vegas. I still think, as much as I like those 3 other guys, there is a lot of separation between them and Vasilevskiy from a volume standpoint. He's still the most likely goalie to reach 40 wins, even if they, kind of do some load management. He could win 40 games in 55 games. He's like a, crazy workhorse, and does it in the regular season year after year. And now he's starting to do it in the playoffs too. So he's really the full package, best goalie in the NHL, probably over the past 10, 15 years combined is Andre Vasilevskiy. Compare him to some of the greats from 10, 15 years ago, and he stacks up and he's even better. So yeah, I would take him in the 6 to 10 range. I wouldn't reach for him in the top 5. We have Vasilevskiy at number 6 behind McDavid, McKinnon, Draisaitl, Kucherov, and Matthews. So interesting, right? 2 Tampa Bay Lightning players in the top 6 overall, and that's coming off another Stanley Cup run. So they've played a ton of hockey all in a short span with the abbreviated season, and then of course last year's run coming like less than 12 months compared to the prior time when they went on the other run. So that's one concern for the Lightning, the emphasis on the regular season a little bit. But I would, to answer your question, spend a first round pick on Vasilevskiy toward the middle to later half of that first round. And I wouldn't think twice about it, because from the save percentage to the wins and everything in between, nobody's better than Vasilevskiy.
Is that correct? When I have on the board here, NHL.com 55 wins, that's what you project for the Bolts this season. That's a tandem between, I guess, Vasilevskiy and Brian Elliott.
Yeah, so it's 55 wins, not counting obviously overtime shootout losses. That always
Sure.
skews things a little bit, gives one team, if they lose a ton in overtime and shootout, a couple more, it makes up for a couple of fewer wins, something like that. But we do think that the Florida Panthers are neck and neck with the Bolts, whether it comes down to a playoff series, looking way ahead to next postseason. If they meet again, with Ekblad, with Sam Reinhart, I mean, with Spencer Knight having even more experience, I think you could say that would go 7 games, not 6, like it did last year. So, yeah, we think they're neck and neck. No team is deeper than Florida right now. You look at the top heavy teams, nobody's better than Tampa Bay with 5 in the top 30. But the depth of the entire roster, especially the forward group, is insane in Florida's favor. So Florida's the deeper team right now, and they still have the stars to kind of tangle with the Bolts in the regular season with Huberdeau and Barkov. So exciting year to stack Florida Panthers players. I would put them at the top of my list if I'm looking to stack 3 or 4 players from one team this year. Nobody's more attractive than the Florida Panthers to me.
I agree, actually. We'll get to them in a little bit more, just in a little bit more in depth, but you're right. I mean, they have a lot to offer. That series was very entertaining. They just didn't get the goaltending. And I thought they outplayed Tampa at times, it's just the special teams weren't great. I mean, you just can't take penalties against Tampa Bay. You see how lethal their
Yes.
power play is. They just score so easily, and it's not even really to fault the three goalies that they played in that series, and Spencer Knight and Chris Drieger and Bobrovsky, who looked, I mean, he picked up one of the two wins that they had, and he was very strong in that one game and still allowed like 3 or 4 goals. Is there a bust on this Tampa team? Like Stamkos, you say you have ranked inside your top 30. I don't know if it was just like he's getting a little bit older, if it was just, another cup run and he dealt with the injuries in the last playoff run, the first time that they won the cup 2 years ago. Uh, I don't know. I'm seeing 15 minutes per game. He wasn't a point per game guy. He was still fine. I just feel like maybe I'm a little hesitant to draft him. I don't know. Are you fine with drafting him? I think a little bit older, and Pete, injuries just seem to pile up with Stamkos over the past couple of years. I don't know. I saw a guy in the playoffs who looked a little slower to me. Am I overthinking this?
Yeah, I mean, Stamkos is definitely on the decline in his career. I mean, still a top flight player. I just think it's interesting that he's no longer like the number one center on the Bolts. He's no longer on the Bolts top line. Remember, as recently as
Yeah.
2 seasons ago, when he was healthy, that line was, had Stamkos with Point and Kucherov all stacked together. Now it's Palat up there. Palat's in a contract year. That's one guy. If he's not on first power play because Kucherov's back, Kucherov missed the whole regular season. We've been talking about him recently. He brings the hits coverage, but will the points be there like they were last year? Will he be a top 75 overall player? If you invest in Palat in that range, could be disappointed if his role changes a little bit. I think it's interesting too, pertaining to Stamkos. I mean, like Killorn was really strong in the playoffs, near point per game. But if you remember, the Bolts were not really trending in the right direction the final 2 months of the regular season, really. And Cirelli had very few points in that span, and he's playing with Stamkos at even strength. So if you look at Stamkos to at least some extent as a shell of his former scoring self when he had like 50, 60 goals a year, and then you look at the fact that his center, Cirelli, is not a fantasy game breaker. Yes, he could be the one out of those five guys that does not finish in the top 30 overall, either because of injury or because of any of these other role changes, position changes, circumstances around him. And just the fact that Stamkos is, let's face it, a secondary scorer at this point. He's not their top line guy anymore.
Right. No, he isn't. And I'm sure Tampa can do multiple things with their lines. I expect Kucherov and Point to stay together. Kucherov takes the entire season off and just doesn't miss a beat at all. 32 points in
Right.
23 playoff games. Point has 23 points in 23 playoff games. A point per game. Wow. I mean, he couldn't back up what he did 2 years ago in the playoffs with 33 points in 23 games. That duo is absolutely electric. Those are for sure fire targets for me. I like Vasilevskiy. I like Hedman. I'm a little hesitant, like I said, on Stamkos. We'll see how these lines shape out. I think we'll see Palat start on that top line and then Killorn. Some talk out of Tampa that Cirelli could just play on the third line. Now, they could have him center and then Stammer goes to the wing and then we have Killorn on the second line. And we saw a little bit of regression. He had the high shooting percentage 2 years ago, and he comes down a little bit in terms of his goal scoring, but he's still a solid asset as well if he's going to play in a top six role and get some power play time. And most times he was playing on that first power play unit, which is so absolutely lethal, like we talked about. So I just think with Alex Barre Boulette, if Cirelli does play in the third line, we could see him play maybe in a top six role in the second line with Stamkos or with Killorn. So maybe just something to keep an eye on in a standard 12-team league, probably not, but in deeper leagues, keeper leagues, he may pop up this season. Pete, we'll take a break. We talked about the Bolts, the defending Stanley Cup champs. Let's talk about maybe the most overrated team in the NHL. Jokes aside, the Toronto Maple Leafs in here next, and also more on the Florida Panthers. We're going to continue the Atlantic Division preview with Pete Jenson of NHL Network. Keep her locked.